I'm David Rubin, the Brown Foundation Curator of Contemporary Art here at SAMA, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to San Antonio Collects Contemporary. I'm standing next to a sculpture by the Italian artist Sandro Chia. The sculpture is called Crying Heart. It's made of bronze, and it features a crying angel carrying a heart as a gift of sorts. In some ways, I feel this is a very appropriate sculpture to introduce this exhibition because in my life, I've been working with contemporary art and contemporary artists for 30 years, and I consider contemporary art itself a gift, like this gold heart. It's something magical. It opens up new doors to experience, to thought, to understanding who we are as a human race. With this exhibition, we have surveyed what people are collecting in their private collections in and around San Antonio, and it's our pleasure to share with you works from 30 collections around town. Part of this exhibition pays tribute to the late Linda Pace, who was a trailblazer, one of the first really in San Antonio to collect the most advanced art of her time. Today, her collection is administered by the Linda Pace Foundation, and they have graciously loaned several works to this exhibition. The works in the exhibition reveal the great diversity of collecting that is taking place today in our city. The exhibition is international in scope. It includes work from 30 collections by 71 artists, 96 objects in all, and 15 of the artists are from San Antonio. Recently, I had the opportunity to sit down with some of the lenders to the exhibition and ask them how they got started, what drew them to contemporary art in the first place, why do they collect, why is it important? We hope that in viewing the exhibition and in listening to the insights of some of our foremost collectors, that you too may be inspired to make contemporary art part of your everyday world. The first interview I conducted was at the home of Jim Dickey. Jim and I had the pleasure of talking about his collecting history and also discussing some works on site. So Jim, how long have you been collecting contemporary art? What got you started?
We had collected so much in the way of late 19th and early 20th century art, mostly American art, that we were almost ready to do something a little different and a little more daring. The focus on whether or not you're interested in that particular piece of art from that artist's career at this moment takes on a lot more immediacy.
Tell us a little bit more about your visits to artist studios. What is it like? What do you do when you visit an artist studio?
Most artists are open to visits because it helps with the relationship they have with their dealer, it helps with the promotion of their own art, and they like talking with collectors, especially people who are interested in what they're doing.
And what advice would you give to someone who wants to become a collector but doesn't know where to start, where to begin?
Start with reading and visiting museums. Perhaps subscribe to some contemporary art magazines. You know, don't start with your checkbook in your hand. Start with developing an interest in the subject. You'll make more informed choices, and you'll buy better things if it's a subject that you know something about.
What's it like living with all these, treasures, not only the contemporary art, but I know you collect in other areas. What's it like waking up and having all this around you?
You know, in a wonderful way, it's a real privilege because you get to the place where you feel like you're living in a museum. What I find really interesting is that when you live with a work of art for a long period of time, that some actually become more compelling over time and more interesting to you.
Do you think this is an important thing for San Antonio to have people collecting contemporary art?
I think for San Antonio, as for any major city, people who are interested in collecting art are a major resource for the town. It becomes one of the repositories of intellectual resource and also a source of things that probably eventually become candidates to be given to the museum.
So this is another one of Will Cotton's paintings called Love Me, I believe, and it's certainly about Valentine's Day.
Well, it is, and it's intended to be a bigger-than-life landscape, if you will, that pulls you into it and tries to invite you to be a part of a world where everything is wonderful and everything is sweet and perfect.
And of course, he baked everything himself.
He did, actually.
How does he manage to not eat all the materials while he's working on it?
Well, I think it gets stale pretty fast. I think by the time he's into painting, the cookie is beyond eating.
Oh, let's hope so. Visiting the home of Guillermo Nicolas was a real treat. Guillermo sees his home as a stage for the artwork, and he enjoys every minute of the performance. Well, Guillermo, thank you so much for being part of San Antonio Collects Contemporary. And I thought we'd begin our discussion by asking you a little bit about how you started collecting contemporary art, and when did you start?
I think my first real attempt at collecting some contemporary art was in the very early 80s. I was still in high school, and I bought my very first piece, or important piece, which was Andy Warhol's Queen Marguerite.
Well, so you started with pop art. Where did you go from there?
I basically got hooked on local artists and really spent probably 10 years focusing on our local art community. I started to get more involved with boards, and I joined the SAMA board in the mid-1990s, where I was again reacquainted with Linda Pace. I'd known her socially, but not really in the art world. And that was the beginning of a whole new era in my collecting.
Tell us a little more about what direction did you then turn towards? How did your collecting interests shift?
I always told Linda when I joined the board of Art Pace, while she was alive, I said, I'm probably your most conservative contemporary art collector. And she'd laugh and she said, we'll change that. And she introduced me to video, and she introduced me to photography. Those years really broadened my scope. And now I'm hungry for everything that's new. I'm fascinated by young emerging artists. I think they are where the energy is, they're where the joy is, and they're very provocative.
Well, you've really had an interesting journey, from the beginnings of a novice to someone who's now very seasoned as a contemporary art collector. What advice would you give to someone who really hasn't started a collection yet but wants to know how to go about it?
We have an incredible group of artists in this town. And so you don't really need to start by traveling anywhere. This is the place to spend your money. The art is good. It can be provocative if you like that. It can also be a little more tame. The art for me, collecting it's my passion, my joy. I come home to it, I'm surrounded by it. Every piece has a story of where I found it, who I was with, how I first saw it, and why I loved it. And I have to tell you that 25 years later, there's not one piece that I've bought that I regret. I love every single. There are a lot of pieces I regret not having bought because my gut told me to buy it and I chickened out.
Why is a show like this important to San Antonio?
Oh, are you kidding? It's huge. In 20 years, the city has managed to attract contemporary art collectors to support our local artists. And the Museum of Art is kind of the culmination of all this, to have this exhibit and to show the citizens of the city what is in our own community is pretty cool.
Well, Guillermo, I know this photograph has real special meaning for you because we recently lost both artists, the artist who created the image and the artist whose purse is in the image. And I'm, of course, talking about Chuck Ramirez, who created it, and Linda Pace, who graciously loaned her purse to Chuck for his series of purse portraits.
Right.
Tell us about what's going on there. It's a conceptual portrait of Linda. What do you see going on in the purse there?
It's amazing what a purse says about somebody. The very first thing that caught my eye was the library card in the middle. I was former chairman of the Library Foundation, and for 20 years have been very dedicated to literacy in libraries. So to see Linda taking little Ava to the library and to have her library card really meant a lot to me.
And is this an ArtPace membership card, or
It
just an
is.
announce it's her membership card?
Yeah,
The founder carried a membership card.
exactly. It shows how busy she was. It shows some of the things that she would take. It's you know, it's an open book.
The phrase live and breathe art truly applies to Sandra and Dr. Rafael Guerra, for every inch of their house is filled with glorious artwork. Well, Sandra and Rafael, thank you so much for inviting us into your home and for being part of San Antonio Collects Contemporary. I'd like to begin by asking you, how long have you been collecting contemporary art and what got you started?
I've been collecting since the 70s, a few pieces at the time, but toward the late 70s, before I went to dental school, I even used student loan money to buy some work in some auctions, and it's been a passion ever since.
Sandra, what about you?
Rafael kind of got me into that, and Rolando Briseño is a little bit guilty of that as well. The very first piece that we got, Rafael and I
Together.
actually purchased it together, and it was one of Rolando's pieces.
So today, when you're purchasing a new work of art, how do you decide? Do you have to come to an agreement, or do you sometimes make individual decisions?
Sometimes I'll make decisions on my own, and Sandra has made some decisions on her own, but most of the time we confer, and we usually come to an agreement on purchases, and it's been a good collaboration.
Now, your collection has a specific focus. You want to tell us a little bit about, what you collect and why you choose to keep your collection specialized?
Mostly local Latino artists. I mean, that was my initial focus. I've gone outside those boundaries at times, but for the most part, that's been my focus. And the good thing is that Sandra and I have been very involved in the arts community for many, many years. And the joy for me has been to actually know the artists, socialize with them, and get to see their work change and expand and grow. And that's been one of the biggest joys for me.
Ultimately, it doesn't really matter who the artist is. We're going to go with what we like. And the other reason, too, is we want to foster the artists here so that they can continue to have a livelihood, because it's very difficult for them.
Yes.
And so we're helping them, and they're helping us, because they're very creative and they do beautiful art.
Why do you think this exhibition might be important? What's the value for the community, from your perspective, in this show, San Antonio Collects Contemporary?
I really feel that anyone can collect art. It doesn't matter what your budget is. And if there's something that you really like that maybe you can't afford, the artist will work with you. So if it's something special, we do the layaway plan, is what they say. So I think it's accessible to everyone.
You have obviously some wonderful relationships with the artists that you collect, probably more than many collectors you really do know, and as patrons in a certain way, support artists. Could you tell us a little bit, Rafael, in your role as a dentist?
Yes.
How do you do that?
I guess I'm known as the dentist to the artists in some circles here in the arts community, and a lot of artists are my patients, and sometimes we've been able to enhance our relationships with my ability to provide health care and their ability to enhance my life with their art. It's important to me, and it's a win-win for all of us. It's a win-win for the community, for the artists, and for myself.
Is there a room in your house that doesn't have art in it?
No,
No, not even the bathrooms have art.
no.
Every
Everything
room.
has art.
Even some closets.
And our outdoor spaces also has art, so
Yeah.
we're really happy about that.
Who's this staring out of the mirror at the viewer?
Well, that's Angel Rodriguez Diaz, a good friend of ours and an incredible artist. When I first saw this painting, it was around the time that he had his residency at ArtPace, and it was applicable for his show because it commemorates the centennial of the Spanish-American War, 1898 to 1998. But I just didn't understand why it wasn't in the show at ArtPace, and it never was, and it's rarely been seen. So I'm really happy that it's going to be in the collections exhibit, because I want more people to see it. It's such a phenomenal piece.
And we just love it, being the table with all the different pieces on it. It's an
Well, it's
awesome
loaded,
piece.
very, very loaded with iconography.
Yeah, and a lot of the things obviously from Puerto Rico, but he also and other things from the Caribbean and also San Antonio,
Right.
where he mentions the Alamo and depicts the Alamo.
See it right here.
That's
right.
right.
There. Yeah, it's beautiful.
I only wish that the late Linda Pace could be here herself to sit down with me for an interview. In any case, I had the pleasure of sitting with Stephen Evans, the executive director of the Linda Pace Foundation, to learn more about Linda's collecting history and her interests as a supporter of the arts. Stephen, thank you so much for the Linda Pace Foundation's participation in San Antonio Collects Contemporary. I'd like to begin by asking you as the executive director to tell us about Linda Pace, the collector. When did she start collecting contemporary art, and what drew her to that?
In the early 90s, she lived in London in the East End, and she was exposed to a lot of provocative work. And I think that this is one of the things that led to her becoming a serious collector of contemporary art. Around that same time, in '93, she went to New York and she went to DIA Art Foundation on 22nd Street, and she saw Katharina Fritzsch's Rat and Koenig piece, The Rat King, the gigantic rats that were installed in a room, and that got her juices flowing even more. I think that she really was stimulated by this piece, and it made her think about ways in which she could support contemporary art, and that led to the creation eventually of ArtPace.
So Linda actually started collecting before she created ArtPace, but then after she created ArtPace, how did that sort of affect her collecting?
She was exposed to the vitality of artists coming in for a residency program, seeing them work, sometimes forging friendships with those artists. And it's at that moment that she began collecting the work of very vibrant contemporary artists working right now. Some of them were more established, some of them were little known, some of them were from Texas, some were national, on the national scene in the United States, some were international artists, and that really affected her vision, and it helped to shape the collection.
Now, Linda, of course, was herself an artist. Did that affect her decisions in what to buy for herself, as to own?
I'm sure that it did, because it was such a part of her identity. She was an artist, a philanthropist, a collector. She was all of these things. And, I've also heard her described as an architect of sorts. And by that, I mean someone that builds something up. And that's what she did with ArtPace and with Chris Park, her project on Camp Street in San Antonio. And I think also with her collection, that she built it over time. And that for her was a very personal process.
Linda was certainly a staunch supporter of contemporary art and a real trailblazer, and I think a role model for many of the collectors who are loaning to our exhibition. Why is it worth it? Why should people support this strange thing known as contemporary art?
Linda believed, and it's written into our mission, that contemporary art is a dynamic force within society. And she believed that it was a way in which we can learn about ourselves, other people, society, politics, all of life. I believe that artists find the way for us through their work, and that it's essential to support contemporary art. And I'm really proud that that's something the Linda Pace Foundation does.
So Stephen, I'm just so excited about at SAMA that we're going to be able to have a work by Oliver Eliasson, a truly 21st century artist. I like to use the term participatory for things like this because it goes beyond the artwork. We're in it. The viewer's involved in it.
Absolutely. It's participatory. It's about the space, reflection, sensory perception, and always his work involves the viewer in that way. It's really exciting.
I hope you enjoyed my conversations with some of the lenders to this exhibition. These are folks who live on an everyday basis with contemporary art and who have made a real commitment to supporting and loving the art of our time. We hope that their thoughts, their insights will inspire you to make contemporary art part of your lives as well. Thank you for being part of this exhibition and for visiting the San Antonio Museum of Art.